All right, y'all, this is my second time recording this because I didn't realize the Screencast-O-Matic has a 15-minute limit, so I'm gonna have to record this again, and that's fine because 15 minutes was kind of long, and I want to make this video like 10 minutes, so I'm gonna get through this presentation. Make sure to review today's agenda. All y'all need to do is complete that attendance form, so do that right now if you haven't already. Watch this video. You're gonna watch an interview right after this, and then you're gonna do an X ticket and be done. Easy peasy. Y'all should be done, honestly, within like the first 45 minutes of class if you start on time. A reminder that our next essay is next Friday and our exam is on the 26th. Please note that this Unit 2 essay might just end up being a Unit 2 quiz and not an essay. I'm still thinking about it, y'all. I'm gonna wait to see what Spirit tells me. I'm gonna wait. Okay, and then today we're going to review immigration quotas and whatnot, so some quotas that y'all are already familiar with. We're going to review the Great Depression a little bit. We're going to talk about Mexican repatriation in the 30s, and I'm going to present this question as a food for thought because I want us to discuss that same question on Monday in class. And then also, like I said, you guys are going to watch a video on repatriation. It's like 20 minutes, but it's so good. It's such a good interview, and it's very informative. And it feels like I'm talking really fast. I'm sorry, but the dope thing about this being recorded is you can rewind this. Hey. Okay, so a quick review before we get into the mass deportations and whatnot. And I want to name now that I won't be able to discuss like every single immigration act or every single instance of deportation or mass deportations that has happened in the U.S. because sadly there's way too many. But I do want to highlight a few that I feel like were very either just important to know or I feel like have been just not discussed enough in American history. All right, so before I even get into like mass deportations of like Mexicans, I want to specifically talk about like that Chinese Exclusion Act and the various immigration quota acts that were passed in the 1920s. So even though the first migrants to this country were Northern and Western Europeans, the second group of migrants outside of the enslaved Africans that were forced to move to the Americas were the Chinese folks. So a lot of Chinese migrants moved to the Americas to help build that transcontinental railroads, and a lot ended up working in mines as well, especially in like California and whatnot, Sacramento, San Francisco area. It's a large Asian community there, and the history of the Asian American community in San Francisco, Sacramento, Northern California is so beautiful and so strong. If you all ever get the chance to visit, you should definitely visit. But off of that, y'all know I can go off on a tangent. So basically with this Chinese Exclusion Act, what caused this was the fact that basically white laborers felt threatened at the fact that like Chinese migrants were taking their job opportunities away from them. And also a lot of Americans just wanted to maintain this racial purity of keeping the United States white. Again, even though they're the same folks that enslaved black folks and brought them to the Americas. So how do you want to maintain the racial purity of a nation when you're forcing other races to come here to work as slaves? Make it make sense, America. Okay, but yeah, that Chinese Exclusion Act, it was used basically to alleviate concerns about job availability and racial purity. So basically appease Anglo-Americans and say, you know what, we are here in support of you, so let's exclude as many Chinese Americans as possible from entering the United States so that y'all white folks can have these jobs. So that's the Chinese Exclusion Act. Some immigration quota acts that also passed like 40 years after that, or 30 years after that, I should say, was the Immigration Quota Act of 1921 and the Immigration Quota Act of 1924. These were direct results of that first Red Scare that was happening. And I know we discussed this last year. Remember the Red Scare? People are fearing that communism is going to infiltrate the United States. Oh no, communism, I'm so scared. So yeah, people feared that Southern and Eastern European migrants would be coming to the United States and bringing communist ideologies with them because a lot of the nations in Southern and Eastern Europe either like were communist nations or surrounded communist nations like Soviet Union and whatnot. So basically what both of these acts did is they placed like a numerical limit on the number of migrants that could enter. I just realized I put he and not the, so please Please note I should say on the number of migrants that could enter. And then the following one, the National Origins Act, or the Immigration Quota Act of 1924, it just made it much more stricter and permanent. So basically what these acts did was they targeted Southern and Eastern European migrants and favored Northern and Western European migrants. Basically saying that since most of the American population descended from Northern and Western European migrants, we'll keep allowing those folks to come into the United States to maintain this racial purity. And we're going to limit the amount of folks from Southern and Eastern Europe that can come to the U.S. because we don't want folks from Southern and Eastern Europe in the United States and messing up our racial purity. Yada, yada. So basically, with both of these acts, notice that they both deal with this issue of like job availability and maintaining one's race, maintaining the racial quotas in the United States, I should say. So after that, I want to kind of like briefly talk about the Great Depression. I know for a fact everybody in this class is familiar with the Great Depression, but we need to understand this context before we get to the Mexican repatriation. Know that the Great Depression was something that was happening worldwide, but specifically in the U.S., it was caused by like that stock market crash, by people buying things on credit. Now, remember, credit cards really became a thing, people taking out loans, there's all of this new technology, so people are buying more than what they can buy, businesses are failing, like it's a whole mess going on in the United States now. So literally everybody, regardless of race, is struggling, and people are becoming desperate. And one of the causes of the Great Depression was also this Dust Bowl that happened in the Midwestern region of the United States. It was caused by severe drought and inefficient farming practices. And basically this Dust Bowl made it so that farmers within this region just could not continue to cultivate crops because they basically messed up the geography and the environment of that region. Like it was just difficult at this point to develop and produce crops and whatnot. Again, this is during the Great Depression and whatnot. So farmers are struggling. So a lot of these farmers in this region, who, again, keep in mind, were Anglo-American, so they're white farmers, they end up moving on over to the West Coast, so places like California and whatnot, to seek more fertile land. But note that literally, 70 years before this, 60, 70 years before this, that territory, California, was once Mexico. And like we discussed yesterday, in yesterday's lesson with the Mexican-American War and Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, all of the Mexicans that were in that region are now considered Mexican-Americans and now have citizenship, right? And should receive equal protection under the law, right? Not quite. So as these white farmers from the Great Plains region, from the Midwest, move to the West Coast, they realize, oh shoot, we have competition. There are Mexican farmers here. There are Mexican-American citizens here that we got to compete against. And these white folks did not like that at all, which led to Mexican repatriation in the 1930s. So Mexican repatriation was literally a series of mass deportations that happened in the 30s of not only just Mexicans, but Mexican-Americans. And I want to specify between the two because there were Mexicans who maybe had moved to the U.S. in like 1910, but there were also people born and raised in the United States, American citizens, people who viewed the United States as their homeland, being forced to repatriate. And I want to put repatriate in quotes because that's how the government called what they were doing, even though it was mass and forced deportations. But repatriate has this connotation to it that kind of like makes it feel like that folks consented to these deportations, when in reality, families did not want to leave because, again, this was their homeland. They established communities, jobs, family structures, all of that here, and we're forcing American citizens, people who under the 14th Amendment should have equal protection under the law, are being forced to now leave and go back to a land that some of them maybe had never even seen before. And again, this is all due to this fear that foreigners, people who are not white, are taking jobs away from Americans during this time period, during the Great Depression, where everybody's super thirsty for jobs and just economic opportunities. So yeah, again, please note that a majority of the people that were repatriated were American citizens. And here's just an image of a headline that was, released during this time period, shipped from Denver Think about the negative connotation just that word shipped has, right? Like, are we talking about humans or are we talking about like cattle and like items? It don't sit well with me. There's also another image of the repatriation process, people experiencing that. And then also another image of people waiting on buses or trains, I believe, to repatriate them back to Mexico. Again, a land where about 60% of these people had never visited before. And that makes me think, when I think about Mexican repatriation, when I think about the Chinese Exclusion Act, when I think about that Immigration Quota Act of 1924, the National Origins Act, I question whether the United States truly cares about national security, whether it truly cares about protecting its white American citizens or its American citizens, or is it more so about preserving whiteness? Because, again, 60% of these folks were citizens. So if you care about national security, wouldn't you care about protecting your citizens that are within your nation? National security is literally protecting the nation, protecting the citizens. Or does the U.S. care about preserving whiteness? And that's not only a question I have like within this time period in the 30s, but also today when we talk about like mass deportations. People don't talk about the various immigrants that come here from Canada, from Great Britain, from France, right? We don't hear about mass deportations of those folks, but we hear about mass deportations of Latinos, of Middle Eastern folks, people from the Caribbean, people from like Eastern Africa. And it's wild to me. It's wild to think about. But I kind of want us to discuss this question on Monday, so I want y'all to ponder on this. Does the U.S. truly care about national security, about protecting their citizens? Or are they just trying to preserve whiteness? Trying to preserve that Northern and Western European bloodline? We'll talk about that. Okay, last thing is that California did end up apologizing. I want to say they released this apology in the 1980s, either 1980s or 1990s, but not too long ago. California passed this Apology Act for the 1930s Mexican repatriation, which is cool. Like, okay, thank you, California, for apologizing. But also, what are you doing today to ensure that, like, Mexican Americans and Mexican migrants are protected within the California borders? And I think California is trying to do a little some, especially in LA. There's, like, literally murals up that pay homage to folks who were repatriated in California, in LA. But I think this whole nation could do much more in terms of like fixing the ills of this repatriation program of the 30s, because literally large numbers of Americans were deported. Like, and the fact that our government, our federal government hasn't done something about that ain't sitting well with me. It's not. Really quickly, here's some recent, or not, I'm not going to say recent, but some other immigration policies. None of these would like be on the test and whatnot, but this is just more so for you to see. The Hart-Celler Act abolished that system of national origin quotas, which I think is very important to know. So that kind of abolished that system of only letting certain Europeans in. But like, we still have like issues of mass deportations today and whatnot. I'm sure a lot of y'all are very familiar with that as well. And I'm hoping that our society can do better when it comes to topics like these. So none of these are going to be on the test, but this is just something for y'all to look at and whatnot. And also just a fact that detention facilities became a thing in the 80s after a huge wave of Cuban and Haitian migrants. So again, we trying to preserve whiteness, or do we really care about national security? Okay. So that was pretty much it. I hope y'all enjoyed my little rant. Y'all know I like to go off. This was past 10 minutes. 15 minutes is almost up, so my timer might cut out. So make sure to watch that interview to the exit ticket. And I hope y'all have a great weekend. Love y'all. Bye.